Lori Daybell is doing absolutely everything she can to try to escape facing the consequences of her actions. It is day 3 of her trial, and it's already the second time she's requested to leave the court and be exempt from attending the trial. News agencies are reporting that starting on day 2, Lori started to show some sadness and was clearly struggling with emotions, which is something we haven't seen from her before in the courtroom in all of the pre-trial hearings. Day 3 has been full of testimony about finding the remains of JJ and Tylee. Lori Daybell is the reason why we even have to hear about this in the first place. Nobody in that courtroom wants to be there dealing with the consequences of what she did, but they don't have a choice. My feelings about Lori always have been that she lived kind of a pampered lifestyle. One where men in her life were constantly cleaning up after her messes and ensuring that she didn't have to face any consequences for anything. And maybe it's this kind of constant protection from having to deal with reality that helped Lori lead a life made up of fantasies. In my opinion, she clearly had no true connection to these 2 children. As I said before, as a mom, if something awful happened to my kids, I would want to hear every piece of evidence. Show me all of the pictures. I need to know what happened to my baby. But Lori already knows what happened to Tylee and JJ. For a long time, she's been playing a game where she fantasizes about them frolicking on their celestial planet, where she sent them after showing them great mercy by ending their lives. This is what she claimed to believe in her delusional following of Chad Daybell's weird prophetic teachings. But now, with evidence slapped directly in front of her, I think it's a little bit harder to pretend.
Your Honor, my client wishes to waive her presence at the testimony for the remainder of the day. It was emotional this morning, and she indicated to us she did not want to attend this afternoon. There is a rule that contemplates a defendant waiving their presence. Would ask the court to review that rule and any relevant case law. We would remind the court of the history of this case with my client, her fragile state of mind, the mental health concerns, the myriad reports that have been filed about her mental health do justify such a request.
All right, thank you, Mr. Archibald. Who's going to respond on behalf of the state?
Thank you, Your Honor. I will be responding for the state.
Go ahead.
Your Honor, Idaho Rule 43 favors a defendant being present for the duration of trial. While there are some exceptions outlined, in doing some quick research, case law indicates that there is no absolute right for a defendant not to be present. They do, however, have an absolute right to be present at trial. In addition, case law is clear, as well as Idaho Rule 43, that a court can require the defendants present. Similarly, to the extent that a court can order a disruptive defendant to be bound and gagged and remain in court, it is clear this is how important it is to have a defendant present for the proceedings. Further, the state of Idaho also has a right to have the defendant present for the duration of trial. We respect that it is the court and not the defendant that controls the proceedings and how they move forward. If this court is to consider the request of the defense counsel for the defendant not to be present, the state would request that this court conduct an inquiry with the defendant on the record. I think case law is clear that that is a requirement in order for a finding that the defendant does not need to be present. But I would again indicate case law is very clear, as well as Rule 43, that this court could override the defendant's request not to be present and require her presence in the courtroom. Further, if the court is to have the inquiry and determine that the defendant is going to be allowed to refuse to participate in certain portions of the proceedings, the state would request a jury instruction reflecting such, that it was due to no fault of the state, but that the defendant chose not to be present for certain portions or certain evidence being presented. We would further request that we receive a ruling today that the state will absolutely be able to comment during closing arguments on the defendant's refusal to be present during the showing of certain evidence. And we would ask that that ruling go into effect for any further portions of the trial outside of just today. If the court were to allow the defendant not to be present and we run into this issue again, that would be an ongoing request from the state.
And having considered the authority and not finding any cited case law to the contrary, I do think this court has the authority to override that request of the defendant to voluntarily excuse herself from certain portions of the trial and not others, where she's been here for the first day and a half of trial. And I do find that within the court's authority to conduct this trial, her presence can and should be required in order to ensure her due process rights and also to ensure a fair trial on behalf of the state. So with that having been considered, I have carefully considered the request of the defendant in this case, who is here present, and I am denying her request to excuse herself from this section of the proceedings that are occurring in the evidence presented by the state's case in chief. So that will be the court's.
Thank goodness the judge denied Lori Daybell's request to leave the courtroom. Some news sources were reporting yesterday that towards the end of the trial, it looked like Daybell fell asleep, supposedly, though others said it looked less like she was asleep and more like she had been a bit drugged for the proceeding. I know that it's commonplace to offer maybe some sort of Xanax or another type of prescription drug to help defendants make it through trial when absolutely necessary. I continue to pray that at the end of this trial, there will be a day of reckoning for what Lori and Chad have done to these children. I hope you'll join me again soon so we can continue heading down this rabbit hole.